Hey guys, and welcome to 6++, a wargaming channel dedicated to scratching your competitive and tactical 40k itch. The 40k tournament scene has started to lift off here in the UK, and we've had a few requests to sort of do a video on the basics of tournament play. This might be aimed towards those of you who are thinking of taking those first steps into an event, or maybe those of you who have just started playing in tournaments and would like a bit more information. In this video, we're going to be looking at where you can find tournaments, what sort of tournaments you might be wanting to take part in, the whole planning, preparation kind of aspect of it. Of course, what to do on the day with some tips and tricks there for you. And finally, how to move on afterwards and kind of assess your game and that sort of thing. As I said, this video is aimed more at the beginner tournament player, but I like to think there are some pretty handy hints and tips in here for those of you who have been on the tournament circuit a bit longer. If you find this video useful and handy, then please do consider giving us a like and a subscribe. It really does help us and it makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside. With the sales act out of the way, let's crack on. So before we actually go off to a tournament, we need to know what types there are. So let's start from the smallest to the largest. First of all, you've got a Rogue Trader tournament, which is an RTT. You may have heard of them. That is a tournament which is a minimum of 3 rounds. Okay, and it's usually 28 players and under. These are traditionally just a one-day event where you can go along to play 3 games and then you have a winner at the end. Next up, we have the Grand Tournaments, or GTs. They are for over 28 players and they are 5 or more rounds in usually a weekend. So we're now starting to push to a 2-dayer event, a bit more grueling. Then we move into the big boy leagues with our majors. So those are apparently, according to the ITC website, 58 players or more, and again a minimum of 5 rounds. And finally, far more common in America are the super majors. You know, over in the UK we don't have too many of these, and they are a minimum of 205 player events, and they are a minimum of 7 rounds. So that's usually going to be your Friday, Saturday and Sunday. So where should we start? Well, obviously it's entirely up to you, but in my opinion, you should go for an RTT first. First of all, Warhammer, despite what many people have you believe, is actually rather quite tiring. And if you play 3 games in a row, you will find yourself pretty exhausted. Mainly from the mental fatigue, but also just the standing around. To go and then do that on the Sunday as well and play another 2 or 3 games really takes it out of you. However, if you just do a Saturday or a Sunday event, 3 rounds, it's a bit easier. On top of that, the opposition you face won't be as stern. A lot of people go to RTTs just for a bit of fun, just to try out new and interesting lists, rather than going to try and take down a 100-person tournament. You'll also find that they are just a bit friendlier, and it's a nice, easy way into the tournament scene. So for that reason, if you are looking to start and go on your first tournament, I think you should be looking for an RTT, which is 3 games. So you've decided what sort of event you want to enter into, but where are you going to find them? Well, here in the UK, there are a few nice websites for you to kind of hunt down and use that information from them. If you just go onto Google and you type in Warhammer 40k tournament UK, a diary will literally just appear at the top of your page. Nice and easy. Furthermore, if you go to Warhammer Tournaments, really good website. They've started their own tournament circuit called the UKTC, and on there you can find a calendar which shows you, monthly all the different events. What I've done is signed up to their newsletter, and that means regularly you get updates, and it just lays out all of the different events that you could be attending, often with hyperlinks. You can kind of click on them and you can find out where to make those purchases from. Furthermore, if you're a Facebook user, Warhammer 40k UK events diary, people are always posting events on there, so that's another great way of finding tournaments. In terms of cost, a one-day event will generally be around the £20 to £30 mark, and then a two-day event will be approximately £50. It is of course entirely up to you who you go with. I would highly recommend, however, going with some friends. You don't have to, you could go alone, but by going with friends, you'll just automatically have that support network there to talk to before and to talk to during and after, and you've got that shared experience. On top of that, it makes transport a lot easier, and if you're going to a two-day event, then of course there's the whole accommodation thing that you might have to consider. So it's a nice idea to go to events with other people. You can quite easily go on your own though. I've been to events on my own, and I wouldn't particularly consider myself a hugely sociable person when it comes to meeting new people. But actually, I made some good friends there at that event I went to, went out for lunch with them. I went to a tournament many months later, bumped into them, went out for dinner with them. People just like talking about Warhammer, and you won't come across too many people who are particularly unpleasant. So I think it can kind of work either way, but especially for your first event, maybe asking around with your friends and seeing if anyone else wants to come with you might be the way to go. I did just mention people who aren't particularly pleasant. There is a misconception that tournament players are very intense, very full on, are just going to make the game unpleasant for you. In my experience, that is not the case. I've been to quite a few tournaments now, and not once have I had a game where it's kind of been unpleasant. I've had games where my opponent has taken it quite seriously and been quite intense, and those are obviously the ones which are probably a bit less enjoyable than ones where you're having a laugh and a joke with your opponent. But if you ask around your friends who do go to the tournaments, you will actually find out that it's really not as intense and as scary as you think. So if that is the thing that's blocking you off from wanting to go to a tournament, ignore it. I promise you, it won't be a problem. So you have picked the event. Now it's the all-important decision, what are you going to take? So of course, first of all, you need to choose what the army is. It might be that you only have one army, in which case that's probably the one you're going to be taking, or it might be that you've got 5 or 6 to choose from. Then you have to deep dive into what do you want your list to look like. Now this isn't a list building video, there are plenty out there, I'm sure we'll end up doing one eventually, but you want to be thinking about the event itself. If you're going to go to a really big deal of an event, you probably want to put a bit more effort into the list building process. You know, look at some lists out there like a net listing type approach, rather than if it was just a fun RTT where you want to try and go and just have a good time. Then you might just be a bit more like, oh, I'll just take these models and those models. And that's what I did to the most recent one, because I just took what I could get painted in time. Speaking of painted, now at some point you're going to be able to get your hands on the mission pack. Really important that you read it. Not only does it include things like the missions you'll be playing, potentially the terrain features and how that will be laid out, the timings, all that sort of thing, but it also probably have a section on the painting expectations for the event. It's really important you pay attention to that. For example, I'm going to Summer Slaughter in London, and their rules are based around make sure you've got 3 colours and based and it's, you know, tabletop ready. I'm going to the LGT a month later, and that has not only the battle ready aspect of things from the rule book, but also it's saying if I'm taking 2 different detachments, they need to be painted differently if they're different chapters or Forge Worlds, for example. So if I wanted to take my Admech and take Forge World Lucius and a Forge World Mars detachment, they would have to have 2 different paint schemes. Something I'm not willing to do because all the army's painted the same way, so therefore that's something I need to take into account in the list building process. So that is something you just need to check, really. With the list sorted, you now want to begin practicing. Now, I've actually got a video coming out soon which is going to be based around how to make the most of your practice sessions to help improve your list and you as a player, but I just wanted to go through a few little tips now. Firstly, it's really important that you let your opponent know what the plan is. If you turn up with your top tier tournament list and they've brought something just for fun, a mix of all little bits and bobs, it's not going to be a good time for anyone. So if you are going to be practicing for the tournament, then do make sure you let your opponent know so that they can factor that in when they work out what they're going to take. Pretty obvious, I'd like to think, but make sure you are practicing the actual missions that are going to be at the event, using, if there is one, the terrain pack from there. So for example, when you're going to the LGT, you'll know what the terrain's going to be, you're going to know what the missions are. Practice that, because why wouldn't you? Think about what you're trying to get out of this. You're trying to improve your list. So you may choose to structure your games in a different way. For example, what I've done with friends before is just play the first 2 turns 2 or 3 times in a day. That's enabled us to work on our deployment, and let's face it, after turn 2, quite often you know the direction the game's going to be heading. And there's no point in playing the extra bits. So you can potentially try and vary it up in terms of how you're structuring your session to help you get the most out of the game itself. You also want to think about the takebacks side of things. Obviously different gaming groups have different rules in terms of how they go about dealing with takebacks. There are 2 ways you can approach a practice game. You could approach it in a no, this is a tournament game, no takebacks, no helping the opposition, I'm going to learn the hard way, and that might well help you. Alternatively, you can openly discuss your plans and how you want to move forward, and oh, what do you think of this? What do you think I should do now? And oh, actually, I didn't mean to do that. Mind if I take that back? And just treat it as a really good training exercise. So you can definitely vary it up like that as well. And finally, in terms of practice, think about the dreaded chess clock. Now, a lot of events, especially the bigger ones, are now saying that if one player out of the 2 wants to use the chess clock, you have to use the chess clock. So if you have one or your friend has one, it might be worthwhile just having a practice at some point. Now, if you're just going to a friendly RTT, this might not be as applicable. But if you're going to one of the big events, it might well be that, especially if you're taking a big army, just have a quick go and work out how long it actually takes if you have an hour and a half each, because you will find you run out of time pretty quickly, quite often. But by practicing with the chess clock, you'll learn how much time you need. So for example, back in 8th edition, I used to play a Necron flying gun line, and I knew that after 2 turns, I would have used about an hour of my clock up and I'd have about half an hour left. And that was fine. I'd get my game done with about 10 minutes left on my clock, because turn 3, 4 and 5, obviously there is a lot less stuff on the board to move about. And that just came from practicing using a clock a lot. Now, I'm not saying that you need to, I'm not saying you should go to tournaments and demand the clock all the time. I'm just saying it is something that if you are planning on going to bigger events, I would, especially if you want to do well, I would recommend just trying to get used to the clocks before you go to one. So we've got the tournament sorted, we've got our list sorted, we've practiced it, we've smashed everyone. Let's get ready. Now, first of all, transporting your army. Obviously, there are a load of different ways you can go about doing this. Some people will just drop all their miniatures in a box because they don't care, they've got 200 gaunts and it doesn't matter what happens to them. Some people have foam cases. I used foam cases a lot last year and the year before that. And then other people might have magnetic solutions, albeit like a big case they've bought or one you've made using the Duncan tutorial, that sort of thing. Whatever you choose to do, just make sure that you have got it all nicely sorted out before you go. You don't want to be trying to sort that out the night before in terms of how are you going to fit your Void Dragon into foam when you haven't got a piece cut out, for example. So what are you actually going to want to take with you to the event? Well, first of all, obviously the miniatures. I would suggest actually getting them all out the night before, just having them, lining them all up, getting them into their units. It helps just refresh you in terms of what you're taking, and make sure you haven't accidentally counted wrong, and then just count them back into the case, and then boom, you know that is sorted. But what else do we need? Well, most tournament packs will ask you to bring objective markers. There are obviously a huge variety out there. We use these see-through ones. I find them really helpful. Some people make their own. You can buy a whole host of them out there. Most players will usually have them, so if you forget yours, it's not the end of the world, but objective markers are very handy. You'll also want to, of course, be taking dice. Just take a wide variety or just take a small selection, that's entirely up to you. We've got our 6++ dice here, and then I have different coloured ones for my wound counters. And then I've also got some kind of trackers which enable me to track my vehicle wounds. Some people use big dice for those. Some people have different things for their command points. So for example, I've got this thing here which I can use to track my command points on. So all those sorts of little things can be handy, but you don't actually need them. You'll also of course need a tape measure, and you know what guys, I would recommend bringing 2 with you, because when I went to the London Grand Tournament 2 years ago now, about halfway through my first game my tape measure broke. And I didn't have one for the rest of the event. Now, thankfully, I had friends at the event and I was able to borrow like an old, rusty one. But it's pretty awkward having to borrow your opponent's tape measure all the time. It's a bit of a nightmare. So I would recommend taking 2 tape measures with you. We always hope for the best, but I would recommend also bringing super glue with you. Models just break in transit, they break during the day. Maybe also blue tack could be an idea, just for a quick fix on certain things. It's just better to be prepared in that way, to be honest. You're of course going to be scoring your game, and how you go about that is entirely up to you. Some people like to bring whiteboards or laminated sheets, or just printed out sheets just to fill out as they go along. Loads of different ways of doing it. I personally use the ITC Battles app. It means I can kind of track how my games are going electronically and look at all my data, but in terms of the actual game, it means that I'm able to track all of those things, and that is what more and more people are using for their tracking of games. I would potentially recommend taking a phone charger with you though, because there have been times where I've been caught short with the battery on my phone. So that's just something to bear in mind, especially if you're also taking photos of the games and that sort of thing. A water bottle is of course going to be handy. Even if you're planning on getting off your face over the course of the day, you still want to be trying to keep those water levels up at the same time. And something which unfortunately not too many people bring, but deodorant, because you are going to be a sweaty person, I can promise you. Quite a lot of these halls and places we play they just become a sweat box, and having deodorant is quite the saviour sometimes. And finally, on my list of things is something I didn't take to my first event and regretted it massively, and it's a tray of some sort. If you think about it, you get all your models out, deploy them for your first game, play your game. Oh, you got tabled, that's annoying. Right, now I have to move my models to the other end of the hall. Now, if you've got kind of like a foam situation going on, have to put all your models in the foam and take them all out is a bit of a nightmare. So I would recommend taking some sort of tray that could literally be like a lunch tray just to put your models in. Like 2 or 3 years ago, my friends loved the fact that I took 2 giant metal barbecue trays, because I had like 100, 200 Gene Stealer Colt to put on them, and they just got thrown on there. But hey, rather than having to put 150 models into foam, I was just able to throw them all into the tray and then just transport it around. I won't have to do that now because I've got my magnetic case, but yeah, a tray to carry around your army, very handy, I can assure you. It might well also be that you want to take a cheat sheet, just something to help you with your ideas. So when I first started playing Gene Stealer Colt, I wasn't too practiced when I went to my first events. So I kind of drew a little diagram of what needed to go where in terms of my buffs and auras and those sorts of things. And then just phase by phase, what what stratagems I would be using. Obviously now we've got the command phase as well, so that's something else to be thinking about in terms of if I, as an admech player, doling out all of my buffs and abilities. But yeah, some sort of cheat sheet just to help you go, oh, I could use this stratagem now. Don't worry about trying to learn all of your stratagems because you don't need to, but maybe having a note of the key ones that you will be able to use will help you. And if you get that done, then obviously you want to take that with you. There's one final thing you may want to do before the event, and that is set yourself a goal. Now, the most common goals I hear are, oh, I'm going to an RTT and I want to go 2-on-1. I'm going to a GT, I want to go 3-2. Those are the classics, just slightly positive. Don't or win more than you lose. And that's all well and good, but to be honest, a lot of the time that's completely out of your hands. For example, Lee went to an RTT and he took a chaos list that he had been running for a long time and was doing really well with. I think he'd got up to like 6, 7, 8-0 with it just in practice games. And he went to this RTT and he went 0-3. He went 0-3 because he played against Imperial Guard 3 games in a row who just loved Vengeance for Cadia. And he just got 3 terrible matchups. Especially in RTTs, you are at the mercy of the of just randomness, really. Over a GT, you're more likely to, get a bit more luck in that regard over 2 days. But I personally don't think setting yourself a target of a 2-on-1, 3-2, 4-on-1, whatever, is particularly the way forward. And we probably will do a video on setting goals. But put it this way, a phrase that I used to apply to sports as a captain all the time was, it was about processes, not outcomes. Okay, so you focus on the processes and the outcomes will come about. So think about things you want to try and achieve. So it might well be that you really want to focus on making sure you score 6 on all of the secondaries you choose. That could be your goal. So therefore, when you go into each game, you're going to be looking, when you select your secondaries, can I score 6 in each of these? Okay? And if at the end of the event you realise that your list is struggling to do that, then hey, that's a learning outcome for you. In terms of other things you might choose, it might be, I'm going to try and remember to put these buffs on in every game. It might be that I'm always going to try and keep these units here. It might be you come up with a very generic battle plan and you try and stick to it each match. Whatever it is, try and set those sorts of manageable goals, and then hopefully what you'll see is the outcome comes because of it. So it's finally the big day, or the big morning most likely, and very early morning, and you're there. Do your best to get there early. You don't want to be rushing around. At the LGT 2 years ago, we took our time, and then we got stuck in traffic and we made it with about 5 minutes to spare. That was not fun, just rushing to get my models out whilst trying to talk to the guy and introduce myself. If you can get there 15-20 minutes beforehand, it does make a big difference, just to the slowing down of the nerves and just helping everything kind of go the right way. So yeah, I would recommend trying to get there early. Now, everyone plays Warhammer differently, and the bits I'm now going to be talking about are my personal preferences. You do you. You choose how to approach the games, and that's entirely up to you, of course. My opinion is that I want to have a good time. I'm going to be spending the next 3 hours of my life with this person. I want them to leave the table having had a good time, be it they've thumped me, I've thumped them, or we've got into an absolute nail biter. So I'm going to go out of my way to be friendly and positive. I'm going to ask them questions. I'm going to ask them where they're from, a bit about how long they've been playing Warhammer, what sort of armies they like to play. Just being friendly. I mean, it's got, I guess, the nice added bonus that you might start to be able to build a picture of the sort of player they are, which might help you in some way, I'm not sure. But just being that friendly, positive face straight away can really push on and set the tone for your game. Obviously, one of the first things you're going to do is ask about your opponent's list, and they're going to tell you about it. Now, this can be hugely intimidating, especially when you don't know what their army does, because they're just going to go through each unit. They're going to tell you that this can do this and this can do this, and oh, I've got this stratagem for this. And it kind of has two effects. First of all, it confuses you because you're never going to remember all that brand new information. And second of all, it can be quite intimidating because they're not going to be telling you, oh, this unit have a really weak save, but, you know, they're just going to tell you the good stuff their army can do. So think about it when you're asking those questions. What is the key information that you need to know? Now, the things I look for are their movement and threat ranges turn 1. I have a general idea of most armies out there, so that helps to an extent, but I need to know how far their main threats can move turn 1, and are they going to be able to get to me? Have they got any pre-game moves? That sort of thing. So I want to know that. I also want to know what the threat ranges are on their best shooting units. Okay, so if I was taking a vehicle army, I would be asking, oh, have you got any damage D6 or damage D3+3 weapons? Okay, what are their ranges? Because I know that I'm going to try and have to be careful of them. If I've got a gun line, I'm going to want to know how far all those close combat things are going to be able to move and get to me. In my opinion, those are the important things. Then you're going to want to know the general army kind of vibe. What's the thing of the army? So if I was playing against Lucius Admech, it would be that they're going to get +1 to their save against 1 damage. If I was playing against Mono Slanesh, I'm going to know that, or want to know that they can advance and charge. Those are the sorts of things. So if you're asking someone, oh, what close combat units do you have? Oh, okay, cool. Those, can they advance and charge for stratagem, whatever? Those are the sorts of things you want to be really specific with your information. Heroic intervention's a big one. Make sure you ask about it so that it becomes clear in your mind. I had a game against Sisters recently. The guy had told me, amongst all the information on the list, he told me that Celestine heroically intervened 6 inches, and I totally forgot about it, and she destroyed a plane in my first turn. So you just want to bear that in mind and just try and find out the specific information. They'll obviously ask you questions, and then it's entirely up to you. Obviously, you can give them as much information as you like. Personally, from my perspective, I don't want to gotcha my opponent. It's just really awkward when you do something. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, well, you didn't ask. So what I try to do is I do lay out all the little tricks that could thwart my opponent or upset them, I guess, out of nowhere. So for example, if I was taking Custodes and I have Terminators in Deep Strike, I would be saying, this is my -1 to hit banner, but he can also bring in a unit within 6 inches of him and just over 3 inches away from an enemy. So that is just something to be wary of. It's like those sorts of things which some people will tell you, some people will not, and it just depends on how you want to play your games, really. I can give a couple of examples of times when top players have avoided that sort of thing. So most recently, John Lennon on stream in the semi-finals of the Lone Star Open, his opponent moved to within 6 inches of Celestine. Now, at no point in this very close game, halfway through in the semi-finals of a massive event, did John Lennon have to say, Celestine can heroically intervene 6 inches, by the way. Didn't have to at all, but he did, and the opponent said, that's fine, I don't mind that happening, which turned out to be a mistake. But, you know, he still did it. You will have an encounter of take-backs at some point. Manny played Malik in the Gibraltar SN Open, whatever it's called, event recently, and there was a bit of a miscommunication about saves, and Manny let Malik completely redo the thing that he wanted. You'll hear stories of this at the top table all the time. It's not a win at all costs game. I try to take that approach. It might well be that, you know, once you've moved to a different phase, you can say, oh, sorry, well, too many things have changed or that sort of thing. But in terms of takebacks, you get to make that decision. The only thing I will say is be consistent, and that's across the board. Be consistent with your takebacks. Be consistent with your dice rolling. For example, what are you going to count as cocked? When you roll and the dice are on top of each other, are you counting that or not? Because I've played against people who do both ways. It's just all about consistency. Don't do it to whatever works to your advantage. The temptation will be there, but you will find that you just become known, I guess, as that player, because word of mouth spreads. As I said earlier, quite often people do go with friends, and if you have an unpleasant game, they will tell their friends, and then those people have games and just word of mouth, and before you know it, you might develop a bit of a reputation. So just be consistent, and then you should be fine, as long as it's not consistently cheating, of course. So it's the end of the game. You have been absolutely smashed. You wish you'd never come to a tournament. What are you going to do now? Well, you need to get a debrief from your opponent. Most people are very happy to talk through their games and kind of offer things that, you know, they think you could have done differently. I remember playing a game on a Sunday morning against Raven Guard, and there wasn't much terrain. And I went second, and after his first turn, I had lost 1,200 points of my army, and that was the game. And, you know, afterwards we sat down and spoke about the different things that we could have done differently. And, you know, we came to the conclusion that actually that was just always going to be game. But other times they might well be able to say, oh, well, if you'd done this, then this would have happened. So try and, especially if you're playing against players who are better than you or more experienced. So when I played the RTT most recently, played against a Sisters player who was a very experienced player. I said, what sort of things could I have done differently? He offered a couple of suggestions. Those are sorts of things that can take you further in your next game. One question which I recently came across, which I thought was a really good question, is what were you worried that I was going to do? We've all been there, you know, your opponent's going, oh, should I do this or should I not? And you're thinking, please do it. Or you're thinking, please don't do it, please don't do it. Or when you're moving your pieces out, you're thinking, right, this unit's really important to me, as is this one. I don't want them to target that. They're having exactly the same thought processes. So if you talk to them and say, well, what didn't you want me to target? That would be really helpful, because, you know, they've already played you, they don't care. But next time you go into that matchup, you can think, oh, right, so they see that this particular unit is really important in this matchup. That means I need to go for it. So I think that's just a really good thing to do, and make sure you do have that discussion if you can. And, you know, vice versa, if you have smashed your opponent, then you know, kind of try and offer your compliments, any things you think they did well, and if they ask those questions, then try and be as forthcoming as you can, because it's just a nice thing to do, really. Whatever happens, you'll be heading home on that Sunday evening, and your head will be buzzing with Warhammer, and it probably will be for the next day or two. This is where the hard yardage is earned. You really want to try and get your thought processes right, get the feedback that you can, work out what went well, what went poorly. You do that by talking to people. You're going to want to talk to your friends, call your friends. Lee and I call quite often to talk about games. You're going to want to maybe write it down. Facebook groups love a tournament report. I used to run a blog. I now do video reports for the channel. There are podcasts. Don't have to necessarily set up your own podcast to start talking through games, but whatever you can, just talk through the processes, get other people's opinions, share your lists, get advice, all that jazz. It will help you become a better player, I promise. I'd also recommend having a bit of a break. Obviously it depends, but I know with my gaming group, when we've been building up to big tournaments like 2-3 years ago, we'd be playing our tournament list constantly, just battering each other. And it was actually really nice to afterwards just play some really weak lists. I remember a friend and I just played like a Space Wolf versus Blood Angel match. This was when in 8th Marines were appalling, and you know, nothing really died. It's just a bunch of hitting and wounding on 3s and 4s, and it was just nice just to have a game that went 5-6 turns, and it was just an enjoyable experience. So yeah, just potentially have a break if you can, especially if you have been, you know, playing at that intense level for a long period of time. And finally, it is now time to find out where you are in the world. Most events you go to, there are ranking systems. So you've got the ITC, which is the main one. If you head over to their website, look at the rankings, you will be able to see where you are as an individual in the world, in your continent, in your country. You'll be able to see where your team is. You'll be able to see where you are for the factions that you've played. You score points depending on where you place in an event, and the bigger the event, the more points you earn. So obviously some people out there are going for the best AdMech player in the world, you know, the best Space Marine player in the world, whatever. And that's quite a nice thing to be able to do. When I was playing Necrons, my goal was to do well with the Necrons, and I managed to get quite high, and then I was up to like 4th at the start of last season, and then COVID happened. So for me, actually, that's put me off playing mixed lists now, like mixed Imperium lists, because I want to try and do well with a faction to score high. Some people don't care about that, and that's absolutely fine. But for other people, we quite enjoy that aspect of it. Also, the UK TC are also doing that as well now. So that's just something to bear in mind. A lot of events are signing up for the UK TC, so you'll have a ranking, a UK ranking in that. As well as kind of an ITC ranking as well. Because obviously the ITC, especially this season, the ITC isn't looking too great for the UK players, because obviously America carried on playing tournaments whilst we were all in lockdown. So there's a long way to catch up for us. But the UK TC will be an interesting one to track this year. And I know like 6++, we're going to try and do as well as we can in the team events and all that sort of jazz. And there we have it, guys. There is my guide to tournaments in the Warhammer 40k scene. Obviously, I'm sure there are many things that I have missed out that you do or you think are important, so please just drop a comment below. If you think the people that are watching these videos are the tournament players or people who are thinking of going to tournaments, and they probably will read the comments to find out whether what I've said is, you know, complete bull or not. So if you think, oh, actually, I like to do this and this works well for me, then yeah, add that in and that would be great. So that's all. Thanks a lot for joining. Take care.